Southwaves Radio presents Hansel and Gretel. Read and adapted for radio by Nevel. Once upon a time there were two children who lived in a great forest. The boy was called Hansel and the girl Gretel. They lived with their father, who was a poor woodcutter, and his wife, the children's stepmother. Times were hard for the family. The father made almost no money and could barely afford any food for his family. One night, while in bed, he turned to his wife and said,
"What is to become of us? How are we to feed our poor children when we no longer have anything even for ourselves?"
"I'll tell you what, husband,"
answered the woman.
"Early tomorrow morning we will take the children out into the forest to where it is the thickest, and then we will leave them there alone. They will not find the way home again, and we shall be rid of them."
"No, wife, I will not do that. How can I bear to leave my children alone in the forest?"
"Oh, you fool! Then all four of us shall go hungry because of you."
She left him no peace until he consented.
"But I feel so very sorry for the poor children."
The two children had also not been able to sleep from their hunger, and had heard what their stepmother had said to their father. Gretel wept bitter tears and said to Hansel,
"Now what will we do?" "Don't cry, Gretel,"
said Hansel.
"I will find a way to help us."
When his parents had fallen asleep, he got up, put on his little coat, opened the door below, and crept outside. The moon shone brightly, and the white pebbles which lay out front of the house glittered like silver pennies. Hansel stooped and stuffed the little pocket of his coat with as many as he could get in. Then he went back inside to sleep. When day dawned, but before the sun had risen, the woman came and awoke the two children, saying,
"Get up, you sluggards! We are going into the forest to fetch wood."
She gave each of them a little piece of bread and said,
"There is something for your dinner, but do not eat it up before then, for you will get nothing else."
Gretel took the bread under her apron, as Hansel had pebbles in his pocket. Then they all set out together on the way to the forest. When they had walked a short time, Hansel stood still and peeped back at his house, and did so again and again. His father said,
"Hansel, what are you looking at there and staying behind for? Pay attention and do not forget how to use your legs."
"Ah, father,"
said Hansel.
"I am looking at my little white cat which is sitting up on the roof and wants to say goodbye to me."
The wife said,
"Fool, that is not your little cat, that is the morning sun which is shining on the chimneys."
Hansel, however, had not been looking back at the cat, but had been constantly throwing one of the white pebble stones out of his pocket on the road. When they had reached the middle of the forest, the father said,
"Now, children, pile up some wood and I will light a fire that you may not be cold."
Hansel and Gretel gathered bushwood together as high as a little hill. The bushwood was lighted, and when the flames were burning very high, the woman said,
"Now, children, lay yourselves down by the fire and rest. We will go into the forest to cut some wood. When we have done, we will come back and fetch you away."
Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and when noon came, each ate a little piece of bread, and as they heard the strokes of the wood axe, they believed that their father was near. It was not the axe, however, but a branch which he had fastened to a withered tree which the wind was blowing backwards and forwards. And as they had been sitting for such a long time, their eyes closed with fatigue, and they fell asleep fast. When at last they awoke, it was already dark night. Gretel began to cry and said,
"How are we to get out of the forest now?"
But Hansel comforted her and said,
"Just wait a little until the moon has risen, and then we will find the way."
And when the full moon had risen, Hansel took his little sister by the hand and followed the pebbles which shone like newly coined silver pieces and showed them the way. They walked the whole night, and by break of day came once more to their father's house. They knocked at the door, and when the woman opened it and saw that it was Hansel and Gretel, she said,
"You naughty children! Why have you slept so long in the forest? We thought you were never coming back at all."
The father, however, rejoiced, for it had cut him to the heart to leave them behind. That night, the stepmother spoke to their father.
"Everything is eaten. We have 1/2 loaf left, and that is the end. The children must go. We will take them further into the woods so that they may not find their way out again. There is no other means of saving ourselves."
The man's heart was heavy, and he thought,
"It would be better for you to share that last mouthful with the children."
The woman, however, would listen to nothing he had to say, but scolded and reproached him. He soon yielded, as he had before. The children, however, were still awake and had heard the conversation. When the old folks were asleep, Hansel again got up and wanted to go out and pick pebbles as he had done before. But the woman had locked the door, and Hansel could not get out. Nevertheless, he comforted his little sister and said,
"Do not cry, Gretel. Go to sleep quietly. I will find another way to help us."
Early in the morning came the woman and took the children out of their beds. Their piece of bread was given to them, but it was still smaller than the time before. On the way into the forest, Hansel crumbled his in his pocket and often stood still and threw a morsel on the ground.
Hansel, why do you stop and look around?
Said the father.
Go on.
"I am looking back at my little pigeon which is sitting on the roof and wants to say goodbye to me,"
answered Hansel.
Fool! That is not your little pigeon. That is the morning sun that is shining on the chimneys.
Hansel, however, little by little, threw all of his crumbs on the path. The woman led the children still deeper into the forest, where they had never in their lives been before. Then a great fire was made again, and the mother said,
Just sit there, you children, and when you are tired you may sleep a little. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening when we are done, we will come and fetch you away.
When it was noon, Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel, who had scattered his by the way. They then fell asleep and evening passed, but no one came to the poor children. They did not awake until it was dark night, and Hansel confronted his little sister and said,
"Just wait, Gretel, until the moon rises. Then we shall see the crumbs of bread which I have strewn about. They will show us the way home again."
When the moon came, they set out, but they found no crumbs, for the many thousands of birds which fly about in the woods and fields had picked them all up. Hansel said to Gretel,
"We shall soon find the way."
But they did not find it. They walked the whole night and all the next day too, from morning till evening, but they did not get out of the forest and were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but 2 or 3 berries which grew on the ground. And as they were so weary that their little legs could no longer carry them, they lay down beneath a tree and fell asleep. It was now 3 mornings since they had left their father's house. They began walking again, but they always came deeper into the forest. All seemed hopeless, and they were beginning to doubt they would ever find their way home. When it was midday, they saw a beautiful snow-white bird sitting in a tree, which sang so delightfully that they stood still and listened to it. And when the song was over, it spread its wings and flew away before them, and they followed it until they reached a little house. When they approached the little house, they saw that it was built of bread, covered with cakes, and the windows were made of clear sugar. The children were starving and couldn't stop themselves. They ran up to the house and immediately began to eat it. Hansel reached up above and broke off a little of the roof to try how it tasted, and Gretel began to nibble at the window panes. Then a soft voice cried from inside the house,
Nibble, nibble, gnaw. Who's that nibbling at my door?
The children answered,
The wind, the wind, the sweet gentle wind,"
and went on eating without disturbing themselves. Hansel, who liked the taste of the roof, tore down a great piece of it, and Gretel pushed out a hole of 1 round window pane, sat down and enjoyed herself with it. Suddenly the door opened, and a woman as old as the hills who supported herself on a crutch came creeping out. Hansel and Gretel were so terribly frightened that they let fall what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head and said,
"Oh, you dear children, who has brought you here? Do come in and stay with me. No harm shall happen to you."
She took them both by the hand and led them into her little house. Then good food was set before them, milk and pancakes with sugar, apples and nuts. Afterwards, 2 pretty little beds were covered with clean white linen, and Hansel and Gretel lay down in them and thought that they were in heaven. The old woman had only pretended to be so kind. She was in reality a wicked witch who lay in wait for children and had only built the little house of bread in order to entice them there. When a child fell into her power, she cooked and ate it, and that was a feast day with her. Witches have red eyes and cannot see far, but they have a keen scent like the beasts, and are aware when human beings draw near. When Hansel and Gretel came into her neighbourhood, she laughed with malice, and said mockingly,
"I have them. They shall not escape me again."
Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she was already up, and when she saw both of them sleeping and looking so pretty, with their plump and rosy cheeks, she muttered to herself,
That will be a dainty mouthful.
Then she seized Hansel with her shriveled hand, carried him into the little stable and locked him in behind a grated door. Scream as he might, it would not help him. Then she went to Gretel, shook her till she awoke and cried,
Get up, lazy thing! Fetch some water and cook something good for your brother. He is in the stable outside and is to be made fat. When he is fat, I will eat him.
Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was all in vain, for she was forced to do what the wicked witch commanded. And now the best food was cooked for poor Hansel, but Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Every morning the woman crept to the little stable and cried,
Hansel, stretch out your finger that I may feel if you will soon be fat.
Hansel, however, stretched out a little chicken bone to her, and the old woman, who had dim eyes, could not see it, and thought it was Hansel's finger, and was astonished that there was no way of fattening him. When 4 weeks had gone by and Hansel still remained thin, she was seized with impatience and would not wait any longer.
Now then, Gretel,
she cried to the girl,
stir yourself and bring some water. Let Hansel be fat or lean. Tomorrow I will cook him and eat him.
Ah, how the poor little sister did lament when she had to fetch the water, and how her tears did flow down her cheeks. Early in the morning, Gretel had to go out and hang up the cauldron with the water and light the fire.
We will bake first, said the old woman. I have already heated the oven and kneaded the dough.
She pushed poor Gretel out to the oven, from which flames of fire were already darting.
Creep in, said the witch, and see if it is properly heated so that we may put the bread in.
And once Gretel was inside, she intended to shut the oven and let her bake in it, and then she would eat her too. But Gretel saw what she had in mind and said,
I do not know how I am to do it. How do I get in?
Silly goose, said the old woman. The door is big enough. Just look, I can get in myself.
And she crept up and thrust her head into the oven. Then Gretel gave her a push that drove her far into it and shut the iron door and fastened the bolt. Oh, then how she began to howl. But Gretel ran away, and the witch was miserably caught in her own trap. Gretel, however, ran like lightning to Hansel, opened his little stable and cried,
Hansel, we're saved! The old witch is gone!
Then Hansel sprang like a bird from its cage when the door was opened. How they did rejoice and embrace each other and dance about. And as they had no longer any need to fear her, they went into the witch's house, and in every corner there stood chests full of pearls and jewels.
These are far better than pebbles,
said Hansel, and thrust into his pockets whatever he could get in, and Gretel said,
I too will take something home with me,
and filled her pinafore full.
But now we must be off, said Hansel, that we may get out of the witch's forest.
They ran away, happy to be free, and after a few hours the forest began to seem more and more familiar to them, and at length they saw from afar their father's house. Then they began to run, rushed into the parlour and threw themselves round their father's neck. The man had not known one happy hour since he had left his children in the forest. The woman had left him the day after. Gretel emptied her pinafore until pearls and precious stones ran about the room, and Hansel threw one handful after another out of his pocket to add to them. Then all anxiety was at an end, and they lived together in perfect happiness. The end. You have been listening to Southwaves Radio Story Slot. The story today was Hansel and Gretel, read by Nevel Yashki, with guest Johnny Fireflame as the father. If you would like to get involved with Southwaves Radio, please go to southwavesradio.co.uk and apply today. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Southwaves Radio and like us on facebook.com/Southwaves Radio.